I assume you've had time to review and hopefully the bank memorandums and the evidence of that we derive from the suspicious activity reports about the various bank reports that allege money laundering, allege receiving wires from state-owned entities and things like that. How does that, what kind of crimes are we talking about there, and how often do you run across people, even the most criminal people, who have 170 suspicious activity reports?
Well, there was more than, or about 700 pages worth of documents that you released yesterday. I haven't looked at them all carefully. But one factor that continues to be overlooked is the fact that in tax law there is a concept of constructive receipt. If I owe you $100, but I don't want to pay you directly, I don't want any sort of trace, but I know that Representative Jordan pays your bills, I will pay him knowing that he's going to take care of you. But you have constructive receipt of that money from me. And I think that if the special agents were able to follow the leads that they wanted to develop, they would develop a lot of information that you'd be interested in.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, I have another unanimous consent request.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify, because Mr. Langworthy said that it was the Democrats who said that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden talked about the weather.
Point of order. Is that a point of order?
I would just like to
Point of order.
introduce the Devin Archer
Point of order.
testimony where he says
Look,
they talked about the weather
Chair,
6 times.
Point of order.
Recognize Mr. Biggs.
Yes, my point of order is that is not.
That is not a point of order. You are correct.
Well,
You are
gotta let him
correct. The
complete
gentleman
his
from Arizona is correct. Chair
It was
will
a
now.
unanimous consent request.
Do you have a unanimous consent?
Yes, to reintroduce those 6 pages of testimony from Devin Archer where
Okay,
he
for
talked
the
about the
for the
weather.
7th time without objection.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson.
Could have just called him and we would have been able to question him.
Well, it comes
As you know,
from
he's headed to
Chair
prison.
recognizes Mr.
Prison.
Burleson.
You
Oh,
go.
who was that? Mr. Biggs? Okay. Do you have a point of order? All right. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri.
Thank you, Professor Turley. Could you tell me, would it be illegal or certainly unethical for elected officials to utilize the resources in their office, utilize their staff to financially benefit their family member's business or their own?
They would. Part of the problem with the reason I think the illusion defense is sort of illusory is that if the president was involved in that influence peddling scheme, it would still involve using his office as a commodity for corruption, right?
Yes.
And if you didn't follow forward, and I think that itself would become an issue of public corruption we'd have to discuss.
Thank you. In fact, on multiple occasions, he claimed that he was not involved in his family business dealings. However, the work of this committee, the reports that we've had from the Treasury Department, suspicious activity reports, the IRS testimony, all tell a different story, all from different sources. And even his own staff didn't get the memo that they weren't supposed to communicate with his son's business. This email, dated December 4th, 2015, shows that Vice President Biden, through his communications staff director, Kate Bettenfield, coordinated a response to reporters when they questioned about the conflict of his involvement with Ukraine and his son's involvement with Burisma. She coordinated with not just Hunter, but Hunter Biden's business associate, Eric Schwerin. Okay? Why is the staff of the President of the United States communicating with a business associate for the president's son? Mr. Schwerin, who served as the executive Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca advisors, was intimately involved in the Biden family business dealings. And he visited Joe Biden's residence 36 times while he was vice president. So in this email exchange, he actually says to her, "Will you call me when you get a chance? I'm in the office or on my cell." And 47 minutes later, this email that was seen on the screen was sent, and the email clearly was a coordination of talking points between the president's office and the business. In fact, what's really striking is that this interaction occurred on the same day. Wait, back up. So the other thing that's really interesting to note is not only did they have an interaction, but in the email it says the VP signed off on this. The VP signed off on the shared communication. The timeline of this is that this occurred on this very same day that the Board of Burisma had requested Hunter to help alleviate pressure that it was facing from the prosecutor Shokin's investigation. Let's turn to another email. We have a staff member from Vice President Biden's office emailing Joe Biden about a scheduled call with Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. Not only was this email sent to, which I think found strange, to Robert L. Peters. We all would think that that would be strange that Biden is using that alias. But the more strange thing about this email is who is CC'd in the email. Hunter Biden. And not just his personal email, his business email account. So you have, again, a staff person coordinating a meeting with the president and using those resources to coordinate that with Biden's business. So if our president is believed to whenever he says he was not involved in his son's business ventures, then why is his son copied on the email? Mr. Chairman, I ask before I forget that these emails be added to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
What the American people need to be asking is the question, why in the world would the vice president coordinate with a business associate of Hunter Biden? Why would he direct his staff to coordinate with the business associate of Hunter Biden? And why does Hunter Biden need his father's approval to sign off on alleged separate business dealings? And why would President Biden lie about his involvement in his family's international business dealings? The analogy that was made before about Hunter using his father's car to get a speeding ticket is an absurd analogy. A more accurate one would be Hunter, if Joe Biden threatened the job of the prosecutor or the officer who is issuing the speeding ticket to his son. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and our last questioner is Mr. Armstrong from North Dakota.
We spend all day long talking about evidence and proof and different definitions and all of those different things, and we spend the days talking about unconditional love for sons and addiction, all of these different issues. But I think we miss one of the points in that this was going on for years, and this was going on for years with various different companies during the course of Joe Biden's vice presidency, after his vice presidency, and at least during his candidacy for president. I'm going to use one example out of many. In 2015, Hunter Biden and James Barnard started working with CEFC, which is a Chinese company, energy company, with direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Now, there's evidence that they delayed payment until after Joe Biden was no longer vice president, so as to assume no appearance of impropriety. In 2017, after Joe Biden left office, Hunter wants to get paid by the Chinese Communist Party. And in July 4th of 2017, there is a meeting in Moscow between Vladimir Putin and President Xi, where the chairman of the CEFC, which is a Chinese energy party, was present and is talking about a large-scale oil and gas purchase of a company called Rosneft by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, on July 30th of 2017, there's a text with Hunter Biden and the members of CEFC, and that text reads, "If I get a call or text from anyone involved other than you, Zhang, or the chairman, I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following that direction." The people he's talking in, this guy disappeared. He's either been killed or he has not been seen since 2018. That is true. And then August 3rd, there's another text. And I'm tired of this, Kevin. I can make $5 million in salary at any law firm in America. If you think this is about money, it's not. The Bidens are the best I know at doing exactly what the chairman wants from this partnership. Please do not quibble over peanuts. We've talked about influence peddling. We've talked about all of this. This is a shakedown. Like, we can use whatever terms we want. This is a threat. And they believed it because the next day they sent $100,000. You think they were scared of Hunter Biden? I don't know. I think we should find out. And it matters because on 9/17 of the same year, there is a deal done between the Chinese Communist Party and Russia for a 17% sale of Rosneft. And we continue to go through all of those things. And now, finally, in December of 2018, over a year later, there's another text. So we're not talking about a speeding ticket, Mr. Gerhardt. We're just not. You're right, Hallie, and I find myself, because I've chosen to alienate all of my friends and family and employees, and you and the kids and my kids, etc., very alone in dealing with rebuilding an income that support an enormous alimony and my kids and costs and myself, dealing with the aftermath of the abduction and likely assassination, that's what the New York Times suspects, of my business partner, the richest man in the world. The arrest and conviction of my client, the chief of intelligence of the People's Republic of China by the U.S. government, the retaliation of the Chinese in the ouster and arrest of the U.S. suspected CIA operative inside China, my suspected involvement in brokering a deal with Vladimir Putin directly for the largest sale of oil and gas assets inside Russia to China, a tax bill that left Eric left hanging over my head, and oh, by the way, my dad is running for president. Mr. Turley, given the evidence we have, would the next step in this investigation be to subpoena Hunter Biden or James Biden's bank records?
Yes, in my testimony, I do warn the committee that once you proceed along the impeachment, the Constitution is on your side, but the calendar is not. You have to quickly determine if this information is going to be withheld so that you can seek judicial review. And that's one of the things that I encourage you to do so that you should not tarry in an impeachment inquiry.
Ms. O'Connor, you agree with that?
Completely. I wish I could have said it as well.
Mr. Dublinsky, you're a forensic accountant. Would you like to see those bank records?
Absolutely.
Here's the thing, and this is the bottom line. If the Vice President Biden knew or helped or engaged in any conduct that in any way, while he knew his son was involved in, that was helping move forward the interests of Russia and China, our two strategic adversaries on the world stage, the American people deserve to know. If the former vice president was doing the same thing or knew his son was doing it or helped in any meaningful way, the American people deserve to know. And if the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party in 2019 knew about any of those things, the American people deserve to know. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now yield to Ranking Member Raskin for a brief closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Online, everybody's making fun of this Seinfeld impeachment, an impeachment hearing about nothing, apparently, 2 days before the government is about to shut down. But I want to say that all four of these witnesses have done a great service for us, not just the Republicans, but for the Democrats, too. And I want to thank them for their patience and their intellectual honesty and their surprising consensus on the key questions today. This process might not be such a whipping post, Mr. Chairman, if we heard from actual fact witnesses, which is why I'm so dismayed by the party line vote, not to call Rudy Giuliani or Lev Parnas to testify. Now, if the majority is abandoning the Ukraine Burisma theory, which used to be the heart of the investigation, as I understood it, then it's clearly we don't need them. But if you're not abandoning that, we absolutely need to hear from them. It's not the complete absence of fact witnesses that troubles us so much today. It's the complete absence of facts. When I started out as a young assistant attorney general, I went to court. I remember on my first day of work, and I heard a judge lecture a lawyer by saying, "Counsel, you have forgotten the very first rule of being a lawyer, which is when you go to court, don't forget to bring the evidence with you." And I'm afraid the majority forgot to bring the evidence with them today. And our GOP colleagues are frustrated, and I know why. Their own witnesses don't agree with them. At least a dozen GOP members on that side of the aisle on the committee have already called for impeachment of Donald Trump. And yet these three expert witnesses called by the majority have all agreed that there is not a sufficient quantum of evidence that would justify impeachment of President Biden. And it's not Professor Turley's fault. He's a constitutional law professor. I don't know if they looked across the country for other constitutional law professors. I don't think you could find one who would say that there's a sufficient quantum of evidence. Maybe John Eastman, but I think he may be detained these days. The fact is that this hearing has been dominated by the word if, as many people have said. It's been filled with hypotheticals. And I'm a law professor, so I'm not averse to them. Imagine a world without hypotheticals. But you don't impeach a president based on hypotheticals and based on obsolete conspiracy theories. Finally, Mr. Chair, I just want to say we've talked a lot about Ukraine today, kind of elusively, indirectly. We've talked about the beleaguered Burisma theory. We've talked about Rudy Giuliani and Lev Parnas and their travels there. We've talked about the Ukraine shakedown. But while we were debating all of this and mentioning Ukraine, there was a very important debate going on in the House floor, because the Republican majority in the House Rules Committee has advanced an amendment to delete $300 million from the Defense Appropriation Act, which will go to provide military and strategic security assistance to the people of Ukraine who are struggling to defend themselves against Vladimir Putin's bloody invasion and imperialist attack on their national sovereignty and on the rule of law there. That war has involved mass kidnapping of children, and I would love to hear from some of our friends on the other side of the aisle with QAnon talk about the actual kidnapping of children that's taking place in Ukraine today, mass rape of women and girls, and mass civilian atrocities, bombing of civilian residences, schools, hospitals, and so on. And yet the pro-Trump, pro-Putin elements in the MAGA caucus, and I know that doesn't apply to everybody on the other side of the aisle, thank God, and I appreciate everything Ken Buck has been doing. These people are trying to cut funding for our democratic allies in Ukraine. And so the assault that began on Ukraine with Donald Trump's Ukraine shakedown, holding up security and strategic assistance to them until he lied about Joe Biden, that continues to this day in their efforts to cut off military and economic assistance to the people of Ukraine. We will be fighting that. I hope that we will be able to get separate legislation, and then the MAGA caucus won't have to vote for it. But in any event, the question of Ukraine is a very serious one, and everybody who stands up for democracy, freedom, and the rule of law has got to be on the side of the people of Ukraine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. One thing I didn't hear from my friends across the aisle in their never-ending defense of the Bidens is what exactly the Biden family did to receive the $20 million. Not one thing. Today's hearing title is the basis for an impeachment inquiry of President Joseph R. Biden. My Democrat colleagues have used this hearing to talk about impeachment, not an inquiry, but actual articles of impeachment. We aren't talking about impeachment today, and they know that. Unlike Democrats' investigations, this committee, under my leadership, does not launch investigations based on predetermined conclusions. We have entered an impeachment inquiry because, as our witnesses have testified, the evidence justifies that. This is how an investigation is supposed to work. I know that some are confused about congressional investigations because Democrat investigations in the past have been about saying a conclusion first and cherry-picking evidence to fit that narrative. The bottom line is that the committee has shown the Bidens alone have brought in over $15 million in their foreign influence peddling, over $24 million if you account for their associates' earnings from the schemes. We have established in the first phase of this investigation where this money has come from: Ukraine, Romania, Russia, Kazakhstan, China. It didn't come from selling anything legitimate. It largely went unreported to the IRS. It was funneled through shell companies and third parties to hide the Biden's fingerprints. This deserves investigation. This deserves accountability. The American people expect this committee to investigate public corruption. Now, we know much of the money goes to Hunter Biden, Haley Biden, James Biden, Sarah Biden, other Biden family members and their business entities. What we need to understand is where it goes next. That is the question this committee seeks to answer, and the evidence supports that next step. Joe Biden showed up, met with, ate with, talked with, shook hands with, and had meetings with, including in the White House, the foreign individuals sending millions of dollars to his family who sold access to him. This was no illusion of access. They got access. My Democrat colleagues wanted to spend this hearing defending the president against an impeachment that is not announced. I do wonder if they have predetermined the president's level of participation in these schemes. 2 days ago, this committee revealed a wire for over $250,000 was sent to Joe Biden's home address. As of yesterday, we know Joe Biden was named on a search warrant that was quashed by a Department of Justice employee. For my colleagues to say there's no evidence of Joe Biden's involvement is not only wrong, but it fails to acknowledge that investigators have been shut down when attempting to explore avenues that led to the president. That's what the Ways and Means Committee released yesterday. The witnesses today have all identified the evidence the committee has uncovered as deserving further inquiry. And that is what this committee will do, no matter where that evidence leads. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today. It confirms the evidence compiled by this committee justifies the investigation of Joe Biden's role in his family's international business schemes and justifies the next step of this investigation. One of those steps is gaining insight into where the Biden's foreign money ended up, for what purposes. Therefore, today, I will subpoena the bank records of Hunter Biden, James Biden, and their affiliated companies. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time to Chairman Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. In his deposition, Hunter Biden's business partner was asked this fundamental question. The request was help. This is the request from Burisma. The request was help from the United States government to deal with the pressure they were under from their prosecutor. Mr. Archer's response, correct. Later question, a few minutes later, what did Hunter Biden do after he was given this request? Mr. Archer's response, he called his dad, someone pretty important in the United States government, which then begs the obvious question. What did his dad do? He gets a request from Burisma. He called his dad. What does his dad do? 5 days later, he gets on a plane, he flies to Ukraine, and he starts the process of firing that prosecutor. That is why Mr. Turley said earlier that this is a confirmed corrupt influence peddling effort. He thinks that's what Joe Biden engaged in. And oh, by the way, that all happened even though the Obama administration had just written the prosecutor general a few months earlier and said, we're impressed with the ambitious reform and anti-corruption agenda of your government. Wrote the very guy Joe Biden decides to do it. And you know what he did? He decided on the plane. He decided on the plane. Read the Washington Post. September 15th, on the plane, Joe Biden called an audible. Quoted. He called it, it was time for a bigger punch. The loan guarantee was the main point of leverage, Professor Gerhardt. He used the money of the people I represent in the 4th District of Ohio to help his family. And anyone with a brain can see that. That was the point of leverage, the vice president declared. So instead, he would tell Poroshenko the loan would not be forthcoming until Shokin was gone. And guess what? They didn't stop there. They made sure the next prosecutor dropped the charges against the very guy who requested this all to happen in the first place, Zolochevsky, the head of Burisma. That is the case. That is the case. That's why the chairman wants the bank records. That's why we're doing the impeachment inquiry. It can't get plainer and simpler than that. And it all happened. It all happened in that 5 days. He gets the request. He calls his dad calls the audible, uses our money to leverage the change. That's what took place. And again, I think anyone with common sense can see it. I yield back.